The rain-slicked streets of a forgotten industrial town gleamed under the sodium glow of flickering streetlights, the kind of night where the air hung heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and distant thunder. It was just past midnight when the boy appeared. No more than 12 years old, his face streaked with mud and tears, clothes torn at the sleeves as if he'd clawed his way through brambles. He stumbled out from the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, his small frame shaking, eyes wide with a terror that cut through the downpour like a knife. No one else was around, no cars, no pedestrians, just the relentless patter of rain and the boy's ragged breaths echoing off the brick walls. He clutched something in his fist, a crumpled scrap of paper, and scanned the empty street with the desperation of someone who knew time was slipping away. That's when the low rumble shattered the silence, a deep, throaty growl that built like an approaching storm. Headlights pierced the darkness, cutting through the sheets of rain as a lone motorcycle emerged from the mist. The rider, a weathered man in his late 40s named Noah Harlan, leaned into the curve, his leather jacket slick with water, the iron promise patch on his back, catching the light like a badge of forgotten oaths. Noah had been riding these back roads for hours, chasing ghosts from a war that had left him scarred, both the jagged line across his jaw from shrapnel and the deeper ones etched into his soul from promises he'd buried under years of solitude. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was running from it, or so he told himself, but as the boy's figure materialized in his headlight beam, Noah's instincts kicked in, the same ones that had saved his squad in the deserts overseas. He killed the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the child's sobs, and swung his leg over the bike. "Hey, kid!" Noah called out, his voice gravelly but steady, like the hum of his Harley idling down. He pulled off his helmet, rain dripping from his salt and pepper hair, and approached slowly, hands visible to show he meant no harm. The boy flinched, backing against the warehouse door, but his eyes locked onto Noah's with a mix of fear and fleeting hope. Up close, the signs were unmistakable, bruises blooming under the boy's collar. His lips split and swelling. Whatever had driven him here, it reeked of desperation, the kind that whispered of locked doors and unspoken cruelties at home. "You lost? Or running from something?" The boy didn't speak at first, just stared, his chest heaving. Then, with a trembling hand, he thrust the paper forward, pressing it into Noah's pocket before Noah could react. On it, scrawled in shaky pencil, was an address, 147 Elmwood Lane. "Please," the boy whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. "They're coming back. Don't let them find me." Before Noah could grab his arm, the boy darted into the shadows, vanishing into the night as quickly as he'd appeared. Noah stood there, rain soaking through his boots, the weight of that scrap burning against his chest. It was a call, a plea from a stranger that tugged at the old vow he'd made to his fallen brother in arms: protect the innocent, no matter the cost. He'd walked away from the club life once, after the betrayal that shattered their brotherhood. But this felt like fate dragging him back. Noah mounted his bike, the engine roaring to life with a defiant snarl, and gunned it toward the address. Elmwood Lane was a run-down stretch on the town's edge, row houses sagging under the weight of neglect, yards choked with weeds. Number 147 loomed at the end, its windows dark except for a faint glow from the basement level, like a heartbeat pulsing in the gloom. He killed the lights and coasted to a stop across the street, senses sharpening, the faint metallic tang of fear in the air, mingled with the oily scent of machinery from a nearby garage. Noah's hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt, not for violence, but for the reassurance of readiness. He'd seen too many shadows in his life turn into monsters. Slipping through the side yard, he avoided the creaky porch, boots silent on the mud. The basement window was half-boarded, grimy glass revealing glimpses of concrete stairs, descending into dim yellow light. Voices drifted up, harsh, muffled, laced with urgency. Noah crouched low, peering through a crack. Two men, burly and tattooed, argued over a workbench cluttered with tools that looked more like instruments of restraint than repair. Chains dangled from hooks on the wall, and in the corner, a small figure huddled under a tarp. The boy. No, this was worse. The tarp shifted slightly, revealing not one but several shapes, small and still, suggesting a scene of hidden struggle, traces of unrest that turned Noah's stomach. He pulled back, heart pounding, mind racing through options. Call the cops? In this town, corruption ran deep. He'd heard whispers of badges bought with dirty money, families torn apart, while authorities looked the other way. No, this demanded the old way, the iron promise code, loyalty forged in fire. Noah fumbled for his phone, dialing the number he hadn't used in years, the one that connected to his scattered crew of ex-vets and outcasts who'd once ridden as brothers. "It's Noah," he said when the line picked up, voice low and urgent. "I need you, all of you. There's a kid in trouble, and it's bigger than we thought." By the time the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, the street in front of 147 Elmwood was alive with the thunder of engines. 35 bikes rolled in formation, a convoy of leather-clad riders emerging from the mist like avenging spirits. Noah stood at the front, the boy's address clutched in his fist, his face set in grim determination. These men weren't outlaws, they were guardians, bound by promises that time couldn't erode. As they dismounted, forming a silent wall of resolve, the basement light flickered erratically inside. Whatever horrors waited below, they would face it together, not with fists first, but with the unyielding honor that had kept them alive through wars and betrayals. The lead rider, an old comrade named James with a prosthetic leg from the same conflict that haunted Noah, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You sure about this, brother? One slip of paper and we're all in." Noah nodded, the weight of the night settling like dust on his jacket. "It's not just paper. It's a promise. And we don't break those." As the group advanced, the air thickened with tension, the scent of dew-kissed grass mixing with the acrid bite of fear. Police sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but it was too late. The bikers had already breached the door, descending into the basement where the truth waited to unravel everything. What they uncovered there would shake the foundations of the town, forcing even the law to reckon with shadows they'd long ignored. The basement air hit them like a wall, stale and thick, laced with the metallic tang of rust and something sharper, like fear distilled into vapor. Noah led the way down the narrow concrete stairs, his boots echoing softly against the damp walls, each step a deliberate press into the unknown. Behind him, the crew fanned out in practiced silence, shadows merging with the flickering bulb overhead that swung like a pendulum, casting jagged silhouettes across the cluttered space. James flanked his right, the older veteran's limp barely noticeable in the adrenaline surge, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a man who'd once cleared IED-riddled streets. The others, Ethan with his quiet intensity, Samuel gripping a flashlight like a lifeline, formed a protective semicircle, their leather creaking faintly as they moved. No guns. That wasn't their way anymore. This was about revelation, not retribution. The workbench in the center loomed under the harsh light, tools scattered like forgotten accusations, pliers, ropes coiled like serpents, a ledger half open to pages scribbled with dates and initials. Noah's gaze swept to the corner where the tarp had shifted earlier, now pulled back by a hesitant hand from one of the riders. Beneath it lay not just shapes, but evidence of lives interrupted. Small mattresses pushed against the wall, stained and threadbare, surrounded by crates that whispered of confinement. Traces of unrest lingered. Overturned chairs, a child's drawing crumpled on the floor, its crayon lines depicting stick figures reaching for a sun that never broke through. No bodies, no overt signs of harm, but the implication hung heavy. a silent scream etched into the dust motes dancing in the beam. "Clear the perimeter," Noah murmured, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. He knelt by the ledger, gloved fingers tracing the entries. Names, mostly children's, ages no older than the boy who'd sought him out, paired with cryptic notes: delivered, resistant, paid in full. It wasn't just one home. This was a nexus, a thread in a web that snaked through the town. His mind flashed to his own past, the promise he'd made in a foxhole to his brother-in-arms, Lucas, who died shielding a village kid from crossfire. "We protect our own," Lucas had gasped with his last breath, "no matter the lines we cross." Noah had abandoned that oath after the club fractured, betrayal from within leaving him adrift. But here, in this fetid underbelly, it roared back to life. A muffled thump from the far wall snapped them alert. Ethan moved first, prying open a rusted door that revealed a narrow alcove, little more than a closet reinforced with padlocks. Inside, huddled against the chill, were 3 figures, 2 girls and a younger boy, no older than 8, their eyes hollow but flickering with guarded hope as the light spilled in. They were alive, unmarked on the surface, but the way they shrank back spoke volumes. Signs of prolonged isolation, of whispers in the dark that no child should endure. "It's okay," Samuel said softly, holstering his light and extending a hand, his voice the gentle cadence of a man who'd lost his own daughter to illness years back. "We're the good guys. Promise." Upstairs, the front door splintered under a boot from the rear guard, but it was too late for subtlety. Sirens wailed closer now, blue and red lights fracturing the dawn through the grimy windows. The 2 men from earlier burst from a side room, faces twisted in panic, one clutching a phone like a weapon. "Who the hell are you?" The larger one snarled, his tattooed arms flexing. But the bikers held their ground, a wall of unyielding presence. James stepped forward, his prosthetic clicking faintly. "We're the ones who keep promises. Yours are about to break." Noah's phone buzzed in his pocket, the boy's number somehow patched through from the scrap of paper. "They're safe," he said into it, keeping his eyes on the unfolding chaos. A small voice crackled back, "Thank you, but it's not over. There's more." Under the floor. The line went dead, leaving Noah staring at the concrete beneath his feet. He signaled to the crew, and together they shifted the workbench, revealing a trapdoor camouflaged in the grit. Prying it open unleashed a rush of colder air, carrying the faint echo of whimpers from below. Another level? The web deepened. Outside, tires screeched as police cruisers pulled up, officers spilling out with hands on holsters, faces a mix of confusion and authority. The lead cop, a grizzled sergeant named Harlan, coincidentally sharing Noah's last name, though no relation, barked orders. "Stand down, this is a restricted scene." But as the bikers emerged, guiding the children into the morning light, the officers froze. One peeked into the basement, flashlight beam catching the ledger and the alcove, and his radio crackled to life with urgent calls for backup. "Jesus," he muttered, color draining from his face. "This isn't just a squat. We've got records here, falsified adoptions, missing reports, buried for years." Noah met the sergeant's gaze, the rain from the night before, still dripping from the eaves like unshed tears. "We didn't break in for sport. A kid slipped us the key. You gonna ignore this now, like the rest?" The sergeant hesitated, the weight of institutional shadows pressing in, whispers of payoffs, of higher-ups turning blind eyes to the town's undercurrents. But the children's wide eyes, the ledger's damning pages, cracked something in him. "Get them to the hospital," he ordered his men, voice thick. "And you, all of you, stay put. This just went federal." As the crew loaded the kids into waiting vans, Noah felt the old fire stir. A redemption not just for himself, but for the brotherhood he'd forsaken. James pulled him aside, the dawn sun glinting off his bike's chrome. "This promise of yours, It's pulling us all in deeper. You ready for what comes next?" Noah nodded, the address burning in his memory like a brand. For them, always. The engines revved in unison, a symphony of resolve against the rising sun. But the true shock was just unfolding, the basement's secrets rippling outward, threatening to topple the corrupt pillars that had shielded monsters for too long. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of Elmwood Lane, where the air still hummed with the fading echo of engines and urgent radio chatter. Ambulances idled at the curb, their red lights pulsing like distant heartbeats, as paramedics wrapped blankets around the 3 children from the alcove. The girls, no older than 10, clutched each other's hands, their faces pale masks of exhaustion, while the younger boy stared at the ground, tracing patterns in the dirt with a bare foot. Noah watched from the sidelines, his leather jacket heavy with the night's damp. The scent of exhaust mingling with the sharp tang of antiseptic from the medical kits. He'd seen fear like this before, in the wide eyes of villagers during patrols overseas, but it never got easier, the way it clawed at the promises you'd sworn to uphold. Sergeant Harlan paced the perimeter, barking coordinates into his shoulder mic, his uniform rumpled from the hasty call-out. The basement door yawned open behind him, a black maw guarded by yellow tape that fluttered in the breeze like cautionary flags. Federal agents were en route, he'd said, their arrival a ticking clock that pressed on everyone's nerves. Noah leaned against his bike, arms crossed, feeling the weight of James's gaze from across the street. The older rider nursed a thermos of black coffee, steam rising in lazy curls, his prosthetic leg extended as if grounding him against the uncertainty. "You think they'll pin this on us?" James muttered, voice low enough to evade the officers milling nearby. Noah shook his head, the stubble on his jaw rasping against his collar. "Not if we stick to the truth. That kid's note, it's our shield." Inside the house, the search intensified, flashlights slicing through the gloom like surgical blades. Ethan and Samuel had volunteered to stay back, coordinating with a pair of detectives who'd arrived in unmarked sedans, their faces etched with the weariness of long shifts. The trapdoor beneath the workbench creaked open wider now, revealing a sublevel that smelled of mildew and neglect, the air cooler and heavier, carrying faint echoes of dripping water. Samuel descended first, his broad frame blocking the light as he swept the beam across rough-hewn walls reinforced with salvaged beams. Crates lined the edges, labeled in faded marker. Supplies, or so they claimed, but prying one open revealed stacks of documents, yellowed edges curling like secrets too long buried, birth certificates, forged and faded, and photos of children in unfamiliar settings, smiles forced against backdrops of institutional grey. "Over here," Ethan called from the far corner, his voice echoing up the stairs like a summons. He knelt by a rusted grate in the floor, the metal warped from years of exposure. With a grunt, he levered it aside, unleashing a puff of dust that danced in the light. Below lay a crawl space, narrow and claustrophobic, but what it concealed turned the air thick with revelation. Tucked into alcoves were more traces, small personal items, a locket engraved with initials, a stuffed bear matted with age, journals filled with childish scrawls pleading for rescue. No overt signs of struggle marred the space, but the implications wove a tapestry of isolation, of lives shuttled in shadows, while the world above carried on oblivious. Ethan surfaced, face grim, handing a journal to one of the detectives. "This isn't random. It's organized. Names match missing persons reports from 3 counties over." Upstairs, Noah stepped into the fray at the sergeant's nod, the house's interior a relic of faded domesticity, peeling wallpaper in floral patterns, a kitchen table scarred from unseen meals, The two men from the basement sat cuffed in the living room, their defiance cracking under the barrage of questions. The larger one, sweat beading on his brow, muttered about just storage, but his eyes darted to the floorboards, betraying the lie. Noah's presence drew stares. The bikers weren't welcome in polite interrogations, but their discovery had shifted the power. "That address you got," the sergeant said, pulling Noah aside into the dim hallway, voice a confidential rumble. "The kid who gave it. Any idea who he is?" Noah hesitated, the crumpled paper still in his pocket like a talisman. He didn't say his name, just begged for help, said they're coming back. The sergeant rubbed his temple, the lines there deepening like cracks in dry earth. Corruption in the department wasn't news to Noah. Whispers had reached the club years ago, tales of files vanishing, families stonewalled by bureaucracy, greased with illicit funds. But seeing it unfold, the sergeant's internal war playing out in furrowed brows, stirred something akin to reluctant alliance. "We've buried heads in the sand too long," Harlan admitted, glancing at the cuffed men. "This web, it ties to City Hall, maybe higher. Adoption's gone wrong, kids funneled through false charities. If it's what I think, those feds will tear it open." Noah nodded, the old vow resurfacing. Protect the innocent, honor the call. Lucas's ghost seemed to linger in the dust motes, a silent approbation. Outside, the children were loaded into the ambulances, their small forms swallowed by the vehicle's interiors. One of the girls paused at the door, turning back with eyes that held a spark of gratitude amid the haze. She slipped something into Samuel's hand. A braided bracelet, simple threads woven with care before the doors closed. Samuel pocketed it, his throat working as he watched them drive off toward the hospital. Sirens silent in deference to the dawn. The crew gathered by their bikes, a loose circle of leather and chrome, sharing nods that spoke volumes. Ethan recounted the crawlspace findings in hushed tones, the group's resolve hardening like steel in a forge. "More kids out there," he said, voice steady but edged with fire. This basement was just the tip. As midday approached, the sun beating down on the scene like an unrelenting spotlight, additional riders arrived, stragglers from the Iron Promise network, drawn by urgent texts rippling through their ranks. Among them was a woman named Olivia, a nurse with the club who'd patched up more than a few of their wounds over the years, her scrubs peeking from under a denim vest. She coordinated with the paramedics, her calm efficiency a balm against the chaos. "I'll ride with them," she told Noah, mounting her own bike with a determined grace. "Make sure they get real care, not just checks." Noah clasped her shoulder, the gesture a bridge across the fractures of his past betrayals. This family, chosen in the crucible of shared scars, was mending under pressure. The sergeant's radio crackled again, summoning him to a private call that drained the color from his face. He emerged from the cruiser, motioning Noah over. "The boy who contacted you, he's one of them. Turned up at a shelter miles away, spinning a tale that matches this mess. Says the basement was a holding spot for relocations." The word hung heavy, laced with the poison of exploitation masked as benevolence. Noah's fist clenched around the paper scrap, the pencil marks smudged but indelible. "Then we keep digging. For him. For all of them." The sergeant met his gaze, a pact forming in the space between badge and patch. "Agreed, but tread careful. These threads lead to powerful people. One wrong pull, and it all unravels on us." James revved his engine, the sound a clarion call that pulled the crew together. They mounted up, a phalanx against the encroaching storm of investigations and reprisals. Noah led the way out, the address etched into his soul, the basement's shadows lengthening behind them. Redemption wasn't a single act, it was this ride, this unbreakable chain of loyalty, carrying them toward truths that would demand every ounce of their honor. The road ahead twisted into uncertainty, but the promise burned bright, a beacon in the gathering heat. The asphalt blurred beneath the steady thrum of tires as the convoy cut through the midday haze, a ribbon of chrome and leather weaving past rusted silos and forgotten rail yards on the town's outskirts. Noah rode point, the wind whipping at his face like a relentless interrogator, carrying the faint, acrid scent of overheated brakes from the trailing bikes. His mind replayed the basement's grim tableau, the alcove's huddled forms, the ledger's incriminating scrawl, each image sharpening his resolve like a blade on whetstone. Behind him, James kept pace, the older rider's bike humming with the quiet authority of shared history, while Olivia's softer engine purred from the rear, her nursing kit strapped securely as she flanked the group. The iron promise wasn't just a patch, it was this rhythm, this unspoken pact that pulled them from solitary roads into collective purpose. They pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript diner on the highway's edge, the kind of place where fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects and the coffee tasted of burnt earth. Noah killed his engine first, the sudden silence amplifying the distant wail of a train cutting through the fields. The crew dismounted in a loose formation, boots crunching on gravel, exchanging nods that conveyed more than words could. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow, his broad shoulders slumping slightly as he leaned against his bike. Those kids at the hospital. Olivia's with them now. Says they're stable, but the stories they're whispering. It's a damn network. Ethan's eyes, sharp under the brim of his cap, scanned the horizon. Falsified papers, shuttled like cargo. Ties back to that shelter the boy mentioned. We ride there next. Noah nodded, pulling the crumpled address from his pocket and smoothing it against his thigh. The pencil marks had faded under the day's heat, but the plea lingered, a ghost in the ink. He'd promised Lucas more than protection. It was about dismantling the cages, brick by invisible brick. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges. How deep did this go? The sergeant's reluctant alliance felt fragile, like a truce in no man's land. And Noah knew from his war days that trust in uniforms could shatter under fire. "We go careful," he said, voice low as the diner door swung open, spilling the greasy aroma of fries and regret. "No charging in blind. This town's rot runs to the roots." Inside, the air was thick with the sizzle of a grill and the murmur of truckers hunched over plates, their conversations a low drone punctuated by the clink of silverware. The crew claimed a corner booth, the vinyl seats creaking under their weight, and ordered black coffee all around, strong enough to cut the fog of exhaustion. James slid in beside Noah, his prosthetic leg brushing the table leg with a soft thud. "Remember that op in the valley? The one where we promised those villagers we'd come back?" His voice was a gravelly whisper, eyes distant as if seeing sand-swept tents instead of checkered tablecloths. Noah's jaw tightened, the scar along it pulling taut. "Yeah, we did come back, lost half the squad holding the line." The memory stirred the old fire, a reminder that promises weren't vows to the wind. They were anchors in the storm. Their phones buzzed in unison, a group text from Olivia, relayed through the hospital's secure line. Photos attached. The children settled in clean beds, IV lines dripping like hesitant rain, their faces softening under the care of real healers. But the message cut deeper. One girl talked, names a handler at the shelter, drops kids off for foster placements that vanish, matches the ledger, cops are stalling, feds inbound, but slow. Noah's fist clenched around his mug, the ceramic warm against his calluses. Corruption wasn't abstract here. It was the delay, the averted eyes that let shadows fester. Samuel leaned in, his voice a rumble. "We can't wait for badges. That boy's out there, probably scared spitless. We find the shelter, get ahead of it." The decision hung in the steam rising from their cups, a pact sealed in the diner's hazy light. They rolled out as the sun dipped toward afternoon gold, engines roaring to life like a declaration against the encroaching dusk. The shelter was a squat brick building on the edge of a weedy park. Its sign faded to Hope Haven in peeling letters, windows barred like afterthoughts. Noah coasted to a stop across the street, the crew fanning out behind chain-link fences overgrown with ivy. The air carried the faint institutional scent of bleach and despair, mingling with the earthy damp from an irrigation ditch nearby. No overt guards, but a van idled in the lot, its engine ticking cool, plates muddied to obscure origin. They approached on foot, shadows lengthening as they skirted the perimeter. Ethan picked the side gate's lock with practiced ease, a skill from leaner days, the click echoing like a held breath released. Inside, the yard was a patchwork of cracked concrete and rusted swings. Silent, save for the distant hum of traffic. Noah's hand hovered near his belt, not for the knife, but for the reassurance of readiness born from too many ambushes. Voices drifted from an open window, clipped, professional tones discussing intakes and transfers, laced with the undercurrent of evasion. Peering through the grime-streaked glass, they saw a lobby stripped to basics. Folding chairs, a bulletin board plastered with generic pleas for donations, and behind the desk, a woman in a cardigan, her smile practiced as she hung up a phone. But it was the back hallway that drew them deeper, a flicker of movement betraying hurried footsteps. James signaled, and they slipped inside through a service door, the hinges groaning softly like a warning. The corridor smelled of stale linens and something sharper, fear, perhaps, or the chemical bite of cleaned-up traces of unrest. Doors lined the walls, most ajar to reveal empty rooms with bare cots and lockers, but one at the end stood firm, a keypad glowing faintly. Samuel knelt, listening at the keyhole, his ear pressed close. Kids' voices, muffled. Sounds like they're waiting. Noah's pulse quickened, the boy's plea echoing in his mind. Don't let them find me. This was the thread, pulling tighter. A sudden creak from the lobby froze them, footsteps approaching. The woman from the desk rounded the corner, her eyes widening at the sight of leather-clad figures in her domain. "Who are you? This is private property." Her voice cracked on the edge of authority, but Noah stepped forward, hands open, the address paper extended like an olive branch. "We're here for the truth. A boy gave us this, said it's connected." She faltered, glancing at the paper, recognition flickering before she masked it with indignation. "I don't know anything about—" Sirens pierced the air then, distant but closing. Blue lights flashing through the front windows like fractured accusations, the feds or local cleanup. The crew exchanged glances, the weight of exposure pressing in. Ethan moved to the keypad door, fingers flying over the buttons in a guess born from overheard codes, the lock beeping green. Inside, 4 children huddled on the floor, eyes wide as saucers, surrounded by duffels packed with scant belongings. No chains, no overt harm, but the way they clustered spoke of rehearsed silence, of nights spent bracing for the unknown. "Come on," Noah urged softly, extending a hand. "We're getting you out." As they guided the kids toward the back exit, the woman lunged for a silent alarm, her cry swallowed by the rising chaos. Outside, engines revved in urgent harmony, the convoy forming a shield against the arriving cruisers. Noah lifted the smallest child onto Olivia's bike, the boy's arms wrapping tight around her waist, a spark of trust igniting in the turmoil. Sergeant Harlan's cruiser pulled up first, his face a storm of conflict as he took in the scene. "Harlan, stand down!" But the words lacked bite, his eyes lingering on the children with a dawning reckoning. This proves it. The handler's her. He nodded toward the woman, now cuffed by his own men, her facade crumbling like dry plaster. The sun hung low now, painting the sky in fiery oranges as the group mounted up once more. Noah felt the pull of redemption deepen, not as a solitary burden, but shared among these riders, the family forged in fire, honoring vows that outlasted scars. Yet the web tightened, the boy's warning echoed, "It's not over." More threads waited, hidden in the lengthening shadows, demanding they ride on into the fray. If this chapter moved you, hit that like button. It helps spread these stories of honor and heart to those who need them most. The engines faded into a low growl as the convoy eased into the twilight, the shelter's brick facade shrinking in the rearview mirrors like a discarded secret. Noah led the pack down a winding back road, the asphalt slick with evening dew, carrying the faint, briny scent of the nearby river that snaked through the industrial sprawl. The children from the shelter rode pillion, 2 on Olivia's bike. The others distributed among the riders with careful hands, their small frames bundled in spare jackets that smelled of leather and road dust. No one spoke much. The wind whipped away words, leaving only the rhythmic pulse of tires and the occasional glance back to ensure no shadows pursued. Noah's grip tightened on the handlebars, the vibration traveling up his arms like a reminder of the fragile lives now tethered to their resolve. The boy's original plea burned in his pocket, a crumpled talisman urging them onward, but the web's tendrils seemed to stretch everywhere, pulling at the edges of his certainty. They veered toward an old safe house on the river's edge, a weathered cabin tucked among overgrown pines, its tin roof rattling softly in the breeze. This was iron promise territory from the old days, a bolt hole for when the world closed in, stocked with canned goods and cots that creaked under weight. Noah killed his engine first, the sudden quiet amplifying the lap of water against the dock and the distant call of a loon piercing the dusk. The crew dismounted in a fluid motion, boots sinking into the soft earth, forming a protective circle around the kids. Olivia slid off her bike, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she knelt to check pulses and soothe whimpers with gentle words. "You're safe now," she murmured to the oldest girl, a 12-year-old with braids frayed from haste, her eyes still darting like a cornered animal. No more hiding. Inside, the cabin's interior glowed under lantern light, casting warm pools across scarred wooden tables and walls papered with faded maps of forgotten routes. Samuel built a fire in the stone hearth, the crackle of kindling chasing away the chill, while Ethan secured the perimeter, his flashlight beam sweeping the tree line like a sentinel's gaze. James eased into a chair, his prosthetic leg propped on a stool, nursing a bottle of water as he watched Noah pace. That handler at the shelter, she cracked quick under Harlan's questions, spilled about a placement agency downtown run by some suit who greases palms from here to the city line. His voice was steady, but the lines around his eyes deepened, etched by the weight of revelations that mirrored their own buried pains. Noah stopped, leaning against the doorframe, the cool night air brushing his face. Placement sounds like a front for shuffling kids into the dark. We hit it tomorrow, but smart, no storming in. The children settled on the cots, blankets drawn tight, their whispers a soft undercurrent as Olivia passed out mugs of hot cocoa, steam curling like tentative trust. One boy, no older than 9, clutched a small drawing he'd salvaged from the shelter, a crude sketch of a house with a swing, colors smudged but hopeful. He handed it to Noah without a word, eyes meeting the bikers in a silent exchange that spoke of promises unspoken. Noah took it, folding it carefully beside the address scrap, the paper's edges aligning like pieces of a larger puzzle. His mind drifted to Lucas again, the foxhole vow replaying in the fire's flicker. Protect the innocent. Build the family that endures. He'd walked away once after the club's fracture left him hollow, but these faces, these small, resilient sparks, rekindled the oath, binding him to this chosen kin. A knock shattered the fragile peace, sharp, insistent, echoing through the cabin like a drumbeat. Ethan signaled from the window, his silhouette tense. Harlan, alone. Noah nodded, stepping out onto the porch where the river's murmur provided cover. The sergeant stood in the gloom, his cruiser parked discreetly down the drive, uniform shadowed by the pines. Rain began to patter lightly, droplets beading on his shoulders like unshed doubts. "Feds are crawling all over the shelter now," Harlan said, voice low and edged with gravel. "That handler's talking, names a councilman, ties to falsified guardianships that funneled dozens over years. But they're circling the wagons, evidence vanishing from lockups, witnesses leaning on alibis." He paused, eyes locking on Noah's. "You bikers stirred the hornet's nest. My department split. Some want you collared for trespass. Others see the truth you dragged into the light." Noah crossed his arms, the leather of his jacket creaking softly, rain tracing cold paths down his neck. "We didn't ask for badges. A kid slipped us the key, and we turned it. You gonna let the suits bury this like the rest?" Harlan's jaw worked, the conflict playing out in the furrow of his brow, a man torn between oath and the rot he'd ignored too long. "No, but I need your eyes on this." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket, small and unassuming, handing it over like a reluctant confession. "Files I pulled before they scrubbed the system. Addresses, ledgers matching your basement find. One leads to a warehouse on the docks, active tonight. Movers, they call it. Kids in transit." The weight of the drive settled in Noah's palm, heavier than metal, carrying the echo of muffled cries from hidden holds. Back inside, he briefed the crew by the fire, the flames dancing shadows across their faces as the rain intensified, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. Olivia's expression hardened, her hands stilling on a bandage roll. "I'll stay with the kids here, get them prepped for real help. You go, but come back whole." James rose, clapping Noah's shoulder, the gesture a bridge over old chasms. "This promise of yours, it's ours now. We ride as one." Samuel and Ethan geared up, checking bikes with quiet efficiency. The air thick with the scent of wet earth and oiled chains. By midnight, the convoy slipped toward the docks, headlights dimmed to slits, the river's fog rolling in like a conspirator's veil. The warehouse loomed on the waterfront, a hulking silhouette of corrugated steel and stacked crates lit by sporadic sodium lamps that buzzed like wary insects. Vans idled in the loading bay, engines humming low, figures moving in the gloom, shadowy exchanges under the cover of night. Noah signaled a halt in the tree line, the crew dismounting silently, hearts pounding in unison with the distant lap of waves. This was the heart of the web, pulsing with the corruption they'd vowed to sever. Ethan scouted ahead, melting into the mist, while Samuel covered the flank, his breath steady despite the adrenaline's edge. From a vantage of rusted shipping containers, they watched. Two men herding a group of shadows, small figures, no more than silhouettes against the loading lights, into the van's darkened interiors. No overt force, but the haste, the averted faces screamed of coerced journeys. Noah's blood ran hot, the flash drive's secrets aligning with the scene like damning script. "We move now," he whispered, the word a spark to tinder. They advanced in the fog's embrace, boots silent on the damp concrete, closing the net with the precision of men who'd faced worse odds in foreign sands. A shout cut the night, one of the handlers spotting Ethan's approach, fumbling for a radio. Chaos erupted, doors slamming, engines revving, but the bikers were faster, forming a barrier of resolve as they pulled the children free, one by one, hands gentle amid the fray. A girl of about 11 clung to Noah's arm, her whisper fierce. "The boy. He said you'd come." The vans peeled out, tires screeching on wet pavement, but not before Samuel noted the plates, committing them to memory. Sirens wailed in the distance, Harlan's tip-off perhaps, but the crew had what mattered. Lives extracted from the shadows, evidence mounting like storm clouds. As they retreated to the bikes, the river's mist swirling around them, Noah felt the promise solidify, a chain linking past scars to this night's victory, yet the fleeing vans hinted at deeper layers. the network's roots twisting further into the town's underbelly. Redemption rode with them, but the road demanded more. Honor tested in the gathering dark, loyalty, the only light against the encroaching storm. The fog clung to the docks like a shroud, muting the chaos into a fever dream of blurred edges and half-heard shouts. Noah's boots scraped against the slick concrete as he scooped up the last child, a wiry boy of 7, his eyes wide with the shock of sudden freedom, tucking him against his side while the crew formed a human barricade. The van's taillights pierced the mist like angry red eyes, engines snarling as they fishtailed away, tires kicking up sprays of brackish water that soaked through leather and denim. Samuel's voice cut through the din, low and urgent. Plates noted, out of state, probably switched already. Ethan herded the other 3 kids toward the bikes, their small hands gripping his vest like lifelines, the air thick with the river's briny tang and the acrid bite of exhaust. Noah's heart hammered, a drumbeat syncing with the approaching sirens that wailed like banshees across the water. The warehouse loomed behind them, its steel doors yawning open to reveal stacks of crates that now seemed innocuous, hiding horrors in plain sight. One of the handlers, a lanky figure in a hooded jacket, lunged from the shadows, swinging a crowbar with desperate fury. James intercepted him with a shoulder check, the impact echoing like a thunderclap, sending the man sprawling into a puddle that reflected the sodium lamp's harsh glow. No blows landed beyond restraint. The iron promise code held firm. Subdue. Don't destroy. Enough, Noah growled, pinning the man's arm with a knee, the cold metal of zip ties biting into skin as Ethan secured him. The handler's face twisted, not in pain, but defiance laced with fear. You don't know what you're messing with. They'll bury you all. The children huddled close, their breaths coming in ragged bursts, the oldest girl clutching a frayed backpack as if it held her entire world. She met Noah's gaze, her voice a whisper carried on the fog. He told us about you. The boy from the warehouse said a rider with a scar would come. Noah's scar itched under the chill. A reminder of shrapnel and Lucas's final words, the promise that had pulled him from isolation into this fray. These kids weren't just rescues, they were echoes of that foxhole oath, innocent threads in a tapestry of corruption that demanded unraveling. Olivia's bike idled nearby, her face pale in the mist as she waved them over. Mount up! Hospital run now! I'll take point with these ones. The sirens crested the hill, blue and red lights fracturing the fog into kaleidoscopic shards. Sergeant Harlan's cruiser led the pack, skidding to a halt with a squeal of brakes that sprayed gravel like shrapnel. He burst out, weapon holstered, but eyes scanning the scene with the wariness of a man walking a tightrope over an abyss. Harlan! What the hell? His words died as he took in the children. The bound handler, the bikes forming a defiant crescent against the warehouse wall. Federal agents piled out behind him, sleek SUVs crunching to stops, their vests emblazoned with letters that screamed authority. One agent, a woman with a sharp bob and sharper eyes, approached Noah directly, her flashlight beam pinning him like an interrogation. You're the bikers from Elmwood. This your handiwork? Noah stood tall, rain from an earlier drizzle beading on his jacket, the flash drive Harlan had given him burning in his pocket like contraband. Handiwork? We followed the trail your people ignored. These kids were being loaded like freight. He nodded toward the warehouse, where Samuel and Ethan had already begun cataloging, crates pried open to reveal more documents. Forged IDs stacked like poker chips in a rigged game. The agent's jaw tightened, but she signaled her team inside, the beam of her light catching yellowed papers that fluttered in the breeze. Lists of placements, routes marked in red ink, snaking from small towns to urban shadows. Harlan pulled Noah aside, his voice a harsh whisper under the agent's radio chatter. You nailed it. That suit from the agency? He's the linchpin, councilman by day, trafficker by night, but he's got pull. Evidence is vanishing faster than smoke. The revelation settled like lead in Noah's gut, stirring the old betrayal from the club's fracture. The friend who'd sold out their brotherhood for a cut of the pie. This was bigger, a systemic rot that preyed on the vulnerable, shielded by badges and briefcases. James limped over, prosthetic clicking on the wet dock, clapping a hand on Noah's shoulder. "We got 8 out tonight. That's 8 promises kept." But Noah's eyes scanned the retreating fog where the vans had vanished. The boy's warning replaying, "It's not over." The network wasn't crumbling, it was regrouping, tendrils reaching for retaliation. As the feds cordoned the warehouse, flashlights dancing like fireflies in the gloom, the children were bundled into ambulances, their small forms vanishing into the vehicle's warm interiors. Olivia rode with them, her bike left for Ethan to trailer, her final glance to Noah a mix of resolve and plea, "Come back safe." The crew mounted up, engines growling low to avoid drawing more heat. But Harlan blocked Noah's path, his face etched with the lines of a man choosing sides. "That flash drive, use it. I pulled what I could, but the councilman's calling in favors. Shelter logs, basement ledgers, it all points to a meet tomorrow night. Old mill on the river's bend, final shipment before they scatter." He handed over a scribbled map, paper damp and creased. "Don't make me regret this." Noah pocketed it, the weight of alliance fragile as river mist. "You regret ignoring it all these years?" Harlan's silence was answer enough, a crack in the institutional armor that mirrored Noah's own redemption arc, from solitary rider to guardian of the forsaken. The convoy rolled out under the agent's watchful eyes, headlights cutting through the fog toward the safe house. The river's murmur, a somber escort. Back at the cabin, the fire had died to embers, casting flickering shadows across the walls as the rescued children from earlier stirred on their cots, sensing the newcomer's arrival. Samuel stoked the flames, the wood popping like suppressed gunfire, while Ethan pored over the map by lantern light, tracing routes with a calloused finger. Noah sank into a chair, the day's toll settling into his bones, the scent of river damp clinging to his clothes, the phantom weight of small hands on his arms. Olivia returned hours later, slipping in quietly with updates. The kids were under protection, stories aligning into a mosaic of deceit, false charities siphoning children from broken homes, funneled through the shelter and warehouse to unseen ends. "The boy from the start," she said softly, perching on the arm of Noah's chair, her hand brushing his. "He's at the hospital too. Asked for you by description, the rider who kept the promise." Noah's throat tightened, Lucas's voice overlapping in memory. "Protect our own, no matter the cost." James poured coffee, black and steaming, passing mugs around the circle of faces, scarred, steadfast, bound by more than blood. "Tomorrow's the endgame. That mill, its fortified guards, the works, but we end this." Nods rippled through the group, a silent vow renewing the iron promise, family chosen in the forge of fire and fidelity. Outside, the rain resumed, pattering on the tin roof like impatient drums, washing the dock's grime, but not the stains on the town's soul. Noah stared into the embers, the map's lines burning in his mind. Redemption no longer a solitary ride, but a collective charge against the dark. The web quivered, but it would break. At the mill, under the weight of honor unyielding. Yet, in the quiet hours before dawn, doubt whispered, what price for this justice, and who would pay it? The engines would roar again, carrying them into the heart of the storm, where promises faced their final test. The rain had thickened into a relentless curtain by the time the convoy crested the hill overlooking the old mill, its silhouette jagged against the pre-dawn sky like the bones of a forgotten giant. Noah throttled back, the engine's growl softening to a wary purr as they navigated the muddy access road. Tires churning through ruts filled with standing water that splashed up in silvery arcs. The air hung heavy with the earthy musk of soaked soil and the faint industrial bite of rusting machinery from the mill's derelict frame. Behind him, the crew rode in tight formation. James on his left, prosthetic leg braced against the pegs, Samuel and Ethan flanking the rear, their headlights dimmed to slits that pierced the downpour like hesitant beacons. No words passed between them. The shared glance in the safe-house hours earlier had sealed it, a renewal of the iron promise that bound them tighter than blood. They killed the engines at the tree line, the sudden silence amplifying the rain's tattoo on leaves and the distant rumble of the river swollen by the storm. Noah dismounted first, boots sinking into the muck, his leather jacket slick and heavy as he scanned the mill through the haze. Floodlights spilled from shattered windows, casting erratic pools of yellow across the yard where two vans idled, their exhaust mingling with the mist in ghostly plumes. Figures moved in the shadows, handlers barking orders, crates being shifted toward a loading ramp that sagged under years of neglect. Small shapes darted between them, herded like shadows fleeing light, their muffled protests lost to the gale. Noah's scar throbbed in the cold, an echo of Lucas's dying breath. Protect them, no matter the lines crossed. This was the nexus, the final thread in the web of falsified lives and buried pleas. Perimeter first, Noah murmured, voice barely rising above the wind as he signaled the split. James and Samuel veered left toward the riverbank, where the mill's underbelly dipped into churning water, while Ethan shadowed Noah to the right, skirting a chain of rusted silos that loomed like silent sentinels. The scent of wet timber and oil-soaked earth clung to everything, grounding the tension in sensory grit. Ethan's breath came steady beside him, the younger rider's quiet intensity a mirror to Noah's own, both men carrying ghosts of wars that had taught them patience over fury. They crouched behind a weathered conveyor belt, peering through the rain-slashed gloom. Inside the mill, under the vaulted ceiling webbed with exposed beams, the councilman paced like a cornered wolf, his suit rumpled, Imvone pressed to his ear in frantic negotiation. "Delay the feds. We've got one last load out." Nearby, 6 children huddled on the floor amid stacked pallets, their faces pale smudges, eyes reflecting the fear of journeys they'd been forced to endure. Noah's hand tightened on the flash drive in his pocket, Harlan's gift now a key to exposure. The sergeant's alliance had held through the night, tipped off coordinates, a blind eye to their approach. But trust remained a fragile bridge over the corruption's chasm. A handler near the vans glanced their way, suspicion narrowing his eyes, but the storm's roar covered their advance. Ethan moved like smoke, slipping a pebble under a loose board to create a diversion, a clatter that drew 2 figures away from the children. Noah seized the moment, darting across the yard in a low sprint, rain stinging his face like accusations. He reached the side door first, easing it open on hinges that groaned like reluctant confessions, the interior's stale air rushing out, damp concrete mixed with the faint, cloying trace of fear sweat. Inside, the mill's vast space echoed with drips from the roof, the children's wide eyes locking onto him as he emerged from the shadows. "The rider," one whispered, a girl clutching a threadbare doll, her voice threading hope through the din. Noah knelt, hands open, the address scrapped from the boy, now a symbol extended like a vow. "We're here to take you home, all of you." No time for more. Shouts erupted from the yard as James and Samuel breached the riverside, their silhouettes bursting through a rotted panel. The councilman spun, face draining to ash, but the bikers moved with precision born of brotherhood, encircling the handlers without a fist raised, voices firm commands that pinned them in place. "It's over," James rumbled, his prosthetic steady as he blocked the exit, the rain pattering on his helmet like final judgments. Samuel gathered the children, wrapping them in spare jackets that smelled of road and resolve, while Ethan secured the crates, prying lids to reveal ledgers, drives and maps that mapped the network's veins from small towns to hidden depots. The councilman lunged for a pallet, fumbling for what looked like a burner phone, but Noah intercepted, twisting his arm just enough to disarm without harm, the device skittering across the floor. "You built this on broken promises," Noah said, voice low and edged with the weight of his own redemption, eyes holding the man's gaze until defiance cracked into surrender. Outside, sirens pierced the storm, federal lights converging like justice long delayed, Harlan's cruiser at the fore. The sergeant dismounted in the downpour, water streaming from his cap as he took in the scene. Children safe, handlers subdued, evidence laid bare under the mill's unforgiving glare. Agents swarmed in, their boots splashing through puddles, flashlights sweeping the space like surgical probes. Harlan approached Noah amid the bustle, rain masking the sheen in his eyes. "You did what we couldn't. That boy's waiting at the hospital, says to tell you thanks for keeping the word." Noah nodded, the knot in his chest loosening for the first time since the warehouse night. Lucas's oath fulfilled not in isolation, but through this chosen family. The crew stood together as the children were loaded into vans, small hands waving from windows, a chorus of tentative smiles breaking through the clouds. Olivia arrived on a borrowed bike, her presence a steady anchor as she coordinated with the medics, her glance to Noah sealing the bond. As dawn broke, painting the river in hesitant gold, the convoy reformed for the ride back, engines humming a victory song against the fading rain. The mill's shadows receded, the web severed at its core, corruption's pillars crumbling under the light of truth. Noah rode in the lead, the wind drying his jacket, carrying the scent of fresh earth and possibility. Redemption wasn't an end. It was this road, empaved with loyalty's unyielding steel, promises honored in the quiet acts that echoed loudest. The boy had slipped him an address, but in return they'd reclaimed futures, proving that in a world of broken oaths, honor rode on. Thank you for riding with us through this tale of unbreakable promises and chosen family. If Noah's story of redemption touched your soul, please subscribe for more cinematic journeys into courage and justice. We'll see you on the next road.